Hey everybody, welcome to this week's town hall. Uh, Not much plate to talk about. I mean, we could talk about the recent developments we have in the past 2 weeks. Though not all the developers are here, but happy to kick it off. You know, we've been finalizing the audit, the next PI, and it's very exciting because this audit has all the code that was deployed uh, from the start, Pinto to now. We take security very seriously, and you know, just having the insurance of having it audited and getting another fresh set of eyes means a lot to us. And happy to say that most of the issues that were uncovered during the audit were just mostly aspect issues or view functions, aka not critical to the base. So, I'm currently wrapping that up within the next day or so, and hopefully we can have that out in the next week or two. In addition to the audit, you know, stemming from Pinto Pirates issue, we also want to introduce or upgrade the convert down penalty to factor in the current price of Pinto, such that there is some restriction at some price close to the value target. Maybe Pinto Pirates here, he can talk a little bit more about it.
Yeah, sure. And the basic idea on the little Git issue that I had posted was that the convert down penalty would be amplified according to specific price ranges that were really tight to the value target already. So, for example, if the price is just above the value target and someone wanted to convert their Pinto into LP, the idea with this change that we would like to introduce is that the penalty, instead of going according to like the current penalty calculation with like the 12 season blight factor, if it's within that threshold, the penalty would just be applied as 100% to grown stock. And so the idea is to allow some additional time for the price to spend slightly above the value target before the converts start rolling in.
Thanks, Pinto Pirate. Ben, I'm curious for your thoughts. I know you said you were quite noisy where you're at, but yeah, I want to hear your thoughts on this change.
Well, I think from a development perspective, I think it makes sense to continue to modularize and give customization to the protocol and its ability to, in a very granular way, create particular incentives. So I think as a development, it's very makes sense to me as a way to take the protocol forward in terms of its power and its flexibility. At the same time, personally, I can't say I feel strongly motivated to support a change where the protocol is explicitly saying it wants to mint. Personally, I have mixed feelings about it. I don't think 12 seasons where converting within a very tight range, I don't view that as a significant risk to the health of the protocol. And therefore, it's hard to be strongly against it. But at the same time, I try to think from principles. And to me, the principle the protocol has always took on this front, and Beanstalk before it, is that it doesn't have a preference on when to mint. It doesn't have a preference to mint, in fact. This is an inquiry into the idea that perhaps the protocol can create better stability through minting, or not even explicitly minting, but prioritizing minting in certain instances. It's unclear to me what the right thing to do is. I feel like at this early stage, experimenting is probably better than not experimenting. So I think as long as we're all on the same page that these types of things are, even if at the margin they all seem fine individually, these types of changes where it's like we are finicking with the system in a way to try to get a particular outcome, like changing the crop rate, which I think also gave us tremendously valuable data. I think at this point it's like, the totally principled approach would say don't do it, but getting the data has been very valuable historically. So from where I sit, it's probably, all things considered, it's probably better to make the change and get the data. But I can't say I feel great about it.
Not sure if you read the issue, Ben, but I think this is another layer on top of the current convert down penalty, where the convert down penalty persists over 12 seasons. But the penalty that Pinto Pirates suggested, could go on indefinitely as long the price stays within that price range. Correct me if I'm wrong.
I misunderstood. I'm sorry. I thought it was just that within those 12 seasons, we were going to set the penalty to 100% in certain cases. I didn't understand it that it was a rule that had more primacy that was just based on price. Is that right? That this would just be based on price, or would this also be based on debt level and liquidity level?
I think as far as architected right now, it is just a price input.
Yeah, that to me sounds very aggressive. I think, maybe the thing that I misunderstood might be a better middle ground, where it's like, for some period of time within a certain range. And I would also think that debt level and liquidity level should be included. Then the penalty should be higher. It's like there should be some indicator that it's like, yeah, right now converting down actually hurts the protocol. Therefore, don't do it. And if you're going to do it, you're going to get penalized. That makes a lot of sense to me. But the idea that independent of everything else, at a certain price, the protocol is not going to accept converts, I don't like that. I'm more interested in sort of a ranged approach, which is something that I think some of us have talked about, where it's like we would basically change the value target to a value target range. And then within that range, you don't want to incentivize converts. That to me feels more like authentic or integrated. I don't know, as an idea, like, yeah, the protocol is actually targeting a range, a price range. But I would think also no minting within that range. So I can't say that would have the same effect of what I think this proposal may be intended to do.
All right, curious, you have any thoughts?
Whose thoughts? Sorry, I only caught the back.
Pinto Pirates.
I don't know. Nothing in particular to add. Yeah. I mean, I guess it could be interesting to take into account the like the L2SR, because you could argue at a higher L2SR that the penalty is perhaps not necessary. But I think at the same time, like at a higher L2SR, there's less supply available to convert anyway. So it kind of naturally would reduce the amount that would happen. So, I mean, from my perspective, I don't think it's like a bad thing.
I don't think that's how it works, though. It's like you have to evaluate the marginal incentive to convert, not really a function of like how much convert power is there. And I think on the debt level front, like I would pose the question to you, is the protocol, let's say that we have a really low debt level, or let's say that we have a really high debt level. Like in those cases, is the protocol supposed to prioritize eliminating converts or supporting converts. I think there's an argument to be made when the debt level is really high, that the protocol, really wants mints. But I think there's an equally valid argument that in that case, the protocol wants to minimize the inorganic mints as much as possible, because the real risk is that it mints more and then there's too much supply even more, and then the protocol has to take on more debt when the problem was already that it had too much debt and there was too much outstanding supply. So for me, it's not very clear. It's not very clear what the right policy would be in those instances, independent of the implementation, considering it or supporting, given a debt level, given a liquidity level, how this should change the penalty. I'm posing more of a macro question, which is like, what would you even want the thing to do, if you know what I mean? For me, I feel like we're at the point where, with a lot of these changes to the model, I think the model is pretty darn good, honestly. And I think each of the components that are in the model at this point have been quite meticulously designed. And I think something like, let's just not allow converts, at a certain price level under any other circumstances, to me, that's it feels like fat fingering it a little bit. Like there's not the nuance that is necessary to actually move the ball forward here. I think questions like how does the debt level and how does the liquidity level affect how the protocol even wants people to behave, that has to be understood. And if not understood, at least answered. We need alignment on what the protocol wants people to do before we can create an incentive structure that incentivizes them to do it, if you will. So to me, it's like, I find this proposal to be a little bit confusing in that sense. Like, what do we even want? Do we just want mints? We want mints at all circumstances. We want mints at any debt level and any liquidity level. Is that really the perspective that we want to express? To me, that doesn't resonate, honestly.
That doesn't resonate. Is it the lack of expressiveness? I guess what we're trying to express, you mentioned that whether the protocol wants to mint or express a preference to mint in all conditions. Is your comment on the protocol wanting to mint in all conditions, or just the lack of clarity in what the protocol wants?
For me, the goal at this point, I think we have a pretty complex state space, if you will. A while back, I think it might even be like 2 years ago now. It could be a year ago, though. Hard to tell. We explained at length the Beanstalk state space as being a multidimensional state space that had price, debt level, and liquidity level, and was an evaluation of the current state of the system, and then the protocol would respond to it. With this blight factor, it's the first time that we're adding sort of retroactive looking information to the state space, I guess, other than the previous 2 seasons. And at this point, I think making a policy like under any circumstances, converting is basically disabled based on just the price. I just want us to be on the same page about the way that type of rule affects the state space. Like, this is explicitly saying that at these particular prices, independent of where in the state space the system lies, that the protocol has this very strong preference. And I suggest that, cases that are worth us considering, like how to handle a particularly high or a particularly low debt level, must be answered before we make a change that so handedly affects the protocol and the incentives, if you will. Like, what is the thing that happens when the protocol repegs? Is it that it's the incentives at a micro level are such that it's highly likely to mint more Pinto immediately? Or is it highly likely that it only mints more Pinto if there really is excess demand? Like, you could definitely make an argument that when the protocol is really healthy, it shouldn't care. It should just print. Like, it's super healthy, time to print. I don't know if I would make that argument. I probably wouldn't make that argument. I'd have to think about it more. But at least you could make an argument that that makes sense. But when the protocol is unhealthy, right, when the debt level is really high and the liquidity level is really low, I think there's right now I think as a community we're not on the same page about whether or not the protocol should try to print its way out of this circumstance. And I think this is sort of at the core of the issue. It's like at least to me, I view this proposal as being demonstrating sort of a misalignment as to what the proper way for the system to respond is at any particular moment when it repegs. Like, this is saying we don't care about the debt level, we don't care about the liquidity level, we only care about price. And we want in every instance possible, when the price is at a certain amount, we want to print just a little bit. And we're comfortable with this amount of upside volatility, and we're comfortable with this amount of prints a season, which is sort of implied by the price cap that you would put on this. And it's quite a radically different approach to monetary policy than we've had so far. So I want us to be on the same page about people don't like the monetary policy. People think the monetary policy is not conducive to growth, or not as conducive to growth as other monetary policy, which is both more conducive to growth and not additionally risky, such that the potential for additional growth isn't worth it. I think we just have to be much more clear about what are we trying to have happen. Is what we're trying to have happen that as soon as the protocol repegs, inshallah, it repegs soon enough, and it seems like the protocol is heading in the right direction. The price movement is pretty encouraging, not a lot of outflows. So let's say that the protocol repegs. Is the perspective that we hold really that the protocol shouldn't just chill out? Like, it was just below peg for months. Why should it be minting a single Pinto? Why should it mint a single Pinto until it's quite clear that there's excess demand? My expectation is that there is going to be demand to convert downward above peg. Maybe the protocol would rather print for a week. I don't know. Maybe it would rather print for a week than have people convert down. It's hard to tell, honestly. This is an open question. But from where I sit, once you start paying for prints, once you start just, the object of the system is to print. And the thing that matters is just printing your way out of a slow period. I think that's the type of model that eventually runs away from itself. And even if the first time it may be okay to print your way out of a problem, I think we need to be much more rigorous about when printing is okay and when it's not okay. And I'm starting to come around to the perspective that in certain instances, it's definitely okay to print. That's sort of the function of having a lender of last resort. Like, sometimes you got to print. But I think we need to be much more rigorous about when we want to print, why we want to print, and who we want to print to. Where should the prints be going in order to create the outcomes that we want? This, to me, doesn't feel in line with the depth of the rigor of the rest of the monetary policy design.
Yeah, I mean, I would say I actually disagree for a few reasons. I mean, you mentioned like, if Pinto gets back to $1, there's going to be a lot of like, your expectation is there would be a lot of demand to convert down. And I think you're right. And I mean, frankly, I think that's like part of the problem. Because like for participants right now who are in the silo and they're stacking up their stock, if there's this expectation that, oh, well, once the price reaches $1, there's just going to be a bunch of converting down. There's not going to be any mints. Like for like just a passive holder, like holding in the silo, like, you know, I kind of fail to see like why that would be a good value proposition for someone to do. Because if the value just gets converted down, the value is just, you know, being captured by those individuals who are converting down, and there's not any seniorage being distributed. But and I mean, other than that too, like I don't think your characterization of saying the system is preventing all converting down, preventing, you know, going below the value target. I don't think that's accurate at all either, because individuals will still choose to sell their Pinto. And as Pinto is printed, the Pinto that's earned to the silo depositors, like it won't have any grown stock. So what that means is like there's no penalty. Like there's no penalty to convert the newly earned Pinto. And then similarly, Pinto that gets distributed to the harvestable pods in the field, you know, though, like that's like the point of the field, right? The field creditors get paid back. They sell their Pinto to return to peg. So yeah, I mean, sure, you could say the system's like expressing a preference for some amount of minting, but it's not like it's going to keep the price, you know, as you put it, like artificially high, like printing when there's not actually excess demand. Because like it's not like it'll just like go above and just stay there.
Yeah, I mean, for me, you know, when I hear you, Ben, it seems like you present this in a very binary fashion. Like there's either no preference to, you know, hover around the value target and, you know, express mints, or there's a strong tendency to mint. But like, you know, as Pinto Power alluded to, you know, this grown stock penalty still allows people to convert their newly earned Pinto. You know, harvestable pods are still able to be converted down. So, you know, people with marginal stock growth, I would argue, still are down to burn their stock in you know, hopes of capturing that gain, right? You know, you have a stock which is a potential capture of future mints. You know, it's a trade-off on that versus the instantaneous arbitrage. I mean, to the beanstalk state space. I mean, for me, this change is just change the slope of this blue line of like the effect converts from my perspective, rather than just moving it all together.
There is a lot of nuance. Maybe perhaps I didn't explain myself well. If anything, my issue with the proposal is that it doesn't have enough nuance with respect to when the protocol wants to encourage printing, if you will. So I'm totally in agreement with you, Frito, that there needs to be a lot of nuance in terms of when the protocol does want to print, and as I was saying before, why it wants to print, and who it distributes the prints to, if that makes sense. But I'm not suggesting that in no circumstances would the protocol prefer there to be prints. If anything, like from a meta perspective, one way to think about what the protocol is doing is it's like it is fighting the tide against all of the participants that are in the system, because those participants have totally independent desires for liquidity, for the current price of the protocol, and the protocol can't tell people what to do. It doesn't tell people what to do. Instead, it creates incentives at the margin to encourage people to do certain things that the protocol wants. But a prerequisite of that is that there needs to be a very clear understanding of what the protocol wants. And my contention with this proposal, as I currently understand it, is that what this rule expresses the protocol to want is specifically that at independent of liquidity and debt levels, just a function of price, there are certain prices the protocol does not want conversions at. And to your point, Pinto Pirate, that there is still some conversion, so it's not so total. There's still some value that can be converted. To that, I say absolutely. This fits into the idea of like the protocol gets to pick and choose its incentive structure, and one way it can bifurcate, is by penalizing stock, and the stock penalty obviously only affects the deposits that have stock. So in that sense, sure, this incentive, this penalty does not affect all of the deposits. It only affects most of the deposits. And I think it does compromise the price discovery of Pinto. And so it's like, there's one thing to have a bonus to encourage price discovery. Having a penalty to discourage price discovery, I think, is another beast. And in the past, the use of a penalty has been to discourage people from converting and preserving their standing in the system, their portion of future mints in the form of stock. Even if they're actively moving things in the wrong direction, then we penalize them. That's been the policy historically, which sort of mimics like withdrawing, selling outside of the silo, and then redepositing. You would lose all your stock. But the idea that the system wants no one to convert, like that is the thing that's being expressed. There's just a limit in how much it can affect, if you know what I mean. Because some assets don't have any stock. But it's like the protocol would be expressing a position in that moment that it doesn't want people to convert. And my contention is it's fine. It is fine for the protocol to express that. It already expresses that in certain instances. But we would want, I think, quite clearly some sort of agreed on, even if the agreement is to disagree on what's optimal, some sort of clearly articulated, at these prices and these conditions, which I would want to include debt level and liquidity level, this is why it's actually optimal for the protocol to encourage minting instead of conversions. This is why the protocol wants to mint in this case, instead of just remaining at its value target, which is typically its mission, right? Typically, it's just focused on value target, value target, value target. So now there's a different thing, which is it's at its value target, but that's not good. People want to actually move it closer to its value target. That's not good. This is a different opinion. So I would want us to be really clear about why the protocol is expressing this different opinion when it's appropriate for the protocol to express this opinion. And to me, that none of that is clear. None of that is clear to me.
Maybe I could express why, maybe to make it more clear. I mean, from my perspective, many of the Pinto contributors from our various previous talks, from my understanding, the reason is because that it's beneficial for the protocol to issue Pinto, or I guess disallow converts at all liquidity level and debt, is that, having some ability for the protocol to mint and the attractiveness of stock, and thus the silo part of the protocol, and thus the longer the protocol stays without this attractiveness, the less likely, or the less sticky the silo is, and thus degrades value target maintenance to some degree.
I couldn't disagree more, honestly. From where I sit, I don't see a single participant whose behavior will be better off from Pinto's perspective as a result of something like this. Like you say, the protocol would be more sticky. It's like, I think it's sticky only in the short term and only in the context of people that don't have any conviction. Like who at this point in time, let's be realistic. The protocol is pretty steady. There's not a lot of inflows, not a lot of outflows, and no one's leaving. So I don't see how introducing some like what in my mind is a gimmick, basically, that will facilitate printing when the protocol doesn't have any reason to print other than the depositors are starving and they really want there to be prints, which is legitimate. I'm not trying to make that illegitimate, but that's the only reason to print. The protocol is now basically fundamentally changing its monetary policy to help who? So I would ask, is it the existing depositors? They've already stuck out a bear market within the system. There's no, like, to me, it's like the idea that, oh, you're now going to have a little more printing that's actually likely to lead to more downside volatility in the medium term. Like, I don't know who that helps, honestly. Versus, as I understand the point that's been made by some of the contributors, is that when the system is printing, when the system is working, that's the time when new participants want to come and participate, and people really want to take a look at the system. And I think that's totally legitimate and valid. But to that, I would say this rule change doesn't help those people either. Like, once the protocol is printing, it's printing. But the idea that we're going to have just a little bit of printing because of this, and not to make too much, be too hard on it, but to say, a gimmick, like, we're going to print just a little bit, and that's going to be the way that this whole thing kicks off. Like, sure, but then this is a system that was built on prints. This isn't a system that was built on a community of people that believe in the model working over time. And so it's like, I appreciate very much the idea that we can take the iterative step by having the protocol just at the margin incentivize prints such that it solves this chicken and egg problem, and it just starts to grow and people start to believe in it. For me, that just feels like such a dangerous game. Like, we're going to have gone from 10 million to 100 million, but the way that we did it is that we weren't able to convince a single soul to put in like $1 million or something to kickstart a growth cycle, but we just printed, and that was the way that we got people to put money in. Like, why don't we figure out how to convince people that this is the coolest shit ever and that this is the future of monetary policy, and someone will bite? Like, why don't we figure out how to get people to believe in the thing because the thing is good enough, instead of paying people to believe in the thing because it prints? Like, that's just, to me, that's a philosophy on how we're going to build a community that is fundamentally weak and actually doesn't believe in the model. So I feel like this is an incredibly slippery slope if we're going to start printing because people feel like they want it to print, but there's no rigorous articulation for what the point of the prints are, other than printing is good and printing leads to growth. Like, that to me becomes a real problem.
So, Ben, I mean, it sounds like you're saying in a perfect world, we could design a monetary system that had zero prints at all and people would use it just on principle. Is that the case?
Not at all. In fact, this is the caveat that I feel like I granted in this call, which has not gone particularly noticed, which is that I think that in certain instances, it actually does make sense to print your way out of a problem. Like, that's in my mind, one of the main benefits that the fiat monetary system has over something like Bitcoin is that the lender of last resort actually can print money to spur economic growth when necessary. However, I think that power of when to, effectively juice the books with the printer, that power has to be wielded. I'm acknowledging that power can be useful. So I'm not saying in no circumstances should there be printing. I'm also certainly not saying that, like, Bitcoin is the end all be all. I think there's tremendous value in minimizing volatility in and of itself. But I think from a design perspective, we need to bifurcate the two. Like, at this point, we need to understand, if we're going to print to facilitate certain growth, like, in my mind, that should be because we don't have growth in a particular sector that we have done some particular analysis and very sophisticated analysis that says if we print X dollars, that will return Y dollars to our economy, and Y is greater than X. And even that is a slippery slope. But the idea that at a 10 million market cap, we're going to just start printing because we think that through printing, we're going to be able to get to a $100 million market cap, I think that's a disaster. So you can say, oh, well, the way we're doing it is minimal and it's just at the margin, so it's just a little bit of printing. It's like, sure, that is totally true. Like that, making that change and setting that threshold low enough is not going to be the thing that causes the system to pump to 100 million. But it could be the thing that, gets the APRs up that causes the system to print to 100 million. And from where I sit, that feels like a dangerous game. That feels like a game that, again, money is a social phenomenon. And I think if people's faith in the system is built on, well, we were able to just print our way out of problems, that doesn't feel very solid to me. That doesn't feel like something I would have a lot of faith in as a user, personally.
Except I don't believe the proposal is like, let's click a button and print Pinto. It's like, let's only print if the price is over peg. Like that's still the case. And if
totally,
and
then it's saying like we just don't want to know that the price actually should probably be below peg. Like if you consider everyone's desire to buy and sell, and you include converts in that, if there was no friction in converts, I expect we wouldn't be at peg. Now you could make the argument, and I will make it on your behalf, that we already do this when it comes to not allowing converts below peg downward and converts above peg upward. So in some sense, we're already doing that. But to me, the big difference is it's very clearly directionally aligned. Like we are encouraging movement towards the value target and discouraging movement away from the value target. As soon as you start encouraging movement away from the value target, I think you are making a sea change in what the system is trying to do. And I just want us to be really clear about that before we do it. I'm not saying what the right answer is. I have an opinion, but I don't, it's not like I'm the sole arbiter here. But from where I stand, it would be a big mistake to do that.
I mean, I think there's a strong argument to be made that any prints encourage moving away from the value target, because as we've seen with previous iterations of this experiment, anytime the system starts printing, it just attracts more people and it prints even more. So if we want to fix that problem, we should just not print.
You can't stop. That's the problem you can't stop in the first place. Like, you literally cannot stop the upside volatility and the network effect of like, the system's growing, therefore people want to come. That's the inorganic demand that the system is doing its absolute best to minimize. Like, we've gone to tremendous lengths to design the system in a way that minimizes the incentive to come when it's growing and leave immediately thereafter. To me, that's a pretty different question than, creating incentives for the system to print to attract those people. It's quite adverse in terms of incentives, or maybe not incentives, but in terms of purpose. Like what the intent of the protocol is, to me, becomes really fuzzy. What does the system want in this case? And this is the point I've been harping on the whole meeting, is like, ultimately, I want us to just have an agreement on what the protocol wants. Like the protocol, when it's at 10 million and the protocol hasn't minted in months, the protocol wants to print. And the protocol wants to print because we think printing our way out of this problem is the best way to create a strong group of believers in the protocol. And that's what we want to do. And therefore, then it becomes just an implementation question of, should we penalize converts within a range? Should we just print a little extra? Or should we print even if there's nothing to print? even if the price is below target, like, I don't know what we should do. Maybe we should print some minimum, even if the price is above value target, but it doesn't deserve prints. Like, there's a million different ways that we could design a policy to facilitate the growth. Like, to me, that's actually not even what I'm talking about. I'm talking about what I haven't heard a single argument that I feel is compelling that has convinced me that in the long run, if our goal is to create a new monetary system, a new money that can instantiate a whole global economy, that the best thing that we can do in this moment is to just print. So we're better off just printing our way out of this problem. So if that, that to me is the topic of conversation at the moment. Can we print our way into a stable system? Maybe, I don't know. My instinct is not to do that until all other courses of action have been attempted. In my mind, we can always have a policy to print. We can always test out whether, hey, if we just print, is that going to be enough to attract a 10x growth cycle? Like, sure. But in my mind, once you pull that trigger, you lose the ability to collect any more data from 10 to 100 million. Like, I think the fact that we've been getting data about the way that the temperature is being manipulated now that we have Tractor, I'm very interested in data about the convert bonus and convert order book with Tractor. These are things that, to me, I find to be truly fascinating in our experiment. And it's like, as soon as we just say, okay, like, we just want to print, that all of that goes out the window. And I understand people's desire to be at 100 million, but it's like, let's be rigorous about how we try to get there. And to me, this proposal it feels like, yeah, we just want to grow, and therefore we're just going to make it such that, even though it's just fudging it a little bit, we're going to fudge the thing just a little bit so that it grows enough to kickstart a full growth cycle. And that for me is not, that doesn't feel very aligned with what I think this project should be focused on, personally.
I mean, I feel like we've seen with Beanstalk, I mean, it's not perfect data at all, to be honest, but like, we've seen a lot of data from there showing how converts have increased the price stability a lot. And, it's a trade-off between price and liquidity. And we've seen that in Pinto in the first, let's call it 3 months or so. So I'm curious on your thoughts of, like, we return back to value target and then nothing happens and we go down and, people get dissuaded and then, protocol get no traction, gets no traction at all. Like, is that data needed, or is that data still useful?
It's tremendously useful. I would want to understand clearly, because this is something that happened with Beanstalk. This is not something that has happened with Pinto, at least as I understand it. Like, we've repegged, but then the lack of mints led to a major depeg. Like, that just doesn't feel to me like what's happened. It feels like, sure, maybe people, held out for the first dip, and then when they realized that there was more downward movement to go, they ended up dumping. But it's like, I think that's quite an assumption to make at this point, based on the market activity that we've seen, that the behavior that has caused the system not to grow is that people held out, people were bought in, and they believed in the system. And it was only after we repegged that their dreams were fulfilled. And then we depegged again because some people were so excited about minting, and then we didn't mint immediately after reaching the value target, that then they left. And that is the thing that created the downward cascade since then and the dip to 50 cents. Like, is that what you think happened? Because from where I sit, the policy change that is being proposed is indicative that is people's understanding of the behavior that transpired during this first cycle.
Sorry, repeat that. You said that what transpired. Let's just look at the last target price. Like you're saying, because people's expectations.
From where I sit, I'll try to be clear. From where I sit, the protocol is still in its first macro cycle. We had a big growth. We had some period of time at PEG, and then we had a big DPEG. And the DPEG has had sort of two phases to it. One was an initial DPEG, and I'm not in front of my computer, so I don't remember the exact numbers. That was a couple weeks. And then we had sort of dipped into, I think, the 70s, maybe around 80 cents. And then it repegged after a couple weeks. And then it was at PEG again for a brief period of time, and then it depegged harder. And since then, the protocol's been unable to repeg. And from where I sit, all of this is part of the same first macro cycle, where the analysis that all of the users of the system are doing is similar to the analysis you're suggesting that they're doing, but I think it's a little bit different. To me, the analysis that people are doing is a more simple calculus of risk reward, like what is the expected price movement, what is the printing over time that I can expect, and the proposal that you guys are making or potentially making to within a certain price range to minimize the downward converts to incentivize more mints at the margin, you're basically suggesting that after that first down cycle, within this downward, like this two-part cycle downward, after that first couple week depeg, once we repegged, but we did it sort of weekly, if the protocol had minted in that moment and discouraged converting downward to peg, but instead if the protocol had encouraged minting, that what would happen is that the protocol would have not had the second downward depeg, and the protocol instead would have attracted a new crop of users and already grown to 100 million. And to that, I say that may very well be true, but I think that's bad behavior. I think the protocol is much happier having gotten the other capital out. I think there was at least one holder that dumped $1 million plus of Pinto once we were close to the value target, or maybe even at the value target. And that is the type of impatience where people maybe didn't believe in the model, didn't believe that strongly that it was going to mint sufficiently over a long period of time for them to want to hold it for an extended period of time. They were actually just in it for the pump. And they thought that they weren't just going to get the first pump. They thought they were going to, within a couple weeks, be able to get the second pump. And after they had to wait a couple weeks, they realized, hey, this may take a couple months for us to get to the next growth cycle, and they left. And to me, the big question is, and this is the thing that the market, no one knows during that first downward cycle, once it repegs that first time, is that the end, or is there another downward cycle? Like, if that's the end, then yeah, great. Of course, let's start the printer again. If no one else is going to leave because everyone here is locked in and just a true believer in the protocol and they're not selling under any circumstances, great. Start the printer up. Let's get in another crop of people and go through another cycle. That to me at least sounds coherent. Like, that would be dependent on the thesis that the protocol actually can just keep growing its way into new groups of users, if you will, and that the protocol doesn't need to find new users in advance. It can just print and then find the users. Like, that's a thesis you can have. I think it's a super risky thesis. I think it's sort of the thesis that Terra Luna ran, where they were like, we're just going to artificially mint our way into a large market cap and then try to fund the creation of an economy on our currency. But I think that did not work quite clearly. So I'm not in support of doing that. But at least I could see it being coherent to think that that's the behavior that you're trying to facilitate, right? Like, after that first depeg, before the second depeg, you want to print enough that the protocol doesn't experience the second larger depeg, where all of the participants in the system that are sort of weak-handed all get flushed out. Like, that's an opinion you can have That's the opinion that to me is being expressed with this proposal. Personally, I don't subscribe to that opinion. In my mind, it's much healthier for the protocol to experience this second downward cycle and to flush out the hands that are semi-weak, they don't know. I say get out, buy. And even if we're, as a community, as holders of the currency, going to experience some extra short-term downside volatility because there's no minting, that's totally fine. I think that's much healthier in the long run. That's my perspective. I think this may be a fundamental disagreement. Like, some people think the protocol would be healthier if it has a policy that prints its way out of different situations. And I think, there's valid reasons to try that. I just get very, very nervous that, particularly if that type of print your way out of problems is built into the protocol, I think at some point the thing blows itself up. But maybe I'm wrong.
I think you definitely have a valid perspective, but it's a balancing act, right? Like you said, we should get those weak-handed people out of here. I would say every participant in the protocol, you could classify them as weak-handed to a certain degree. I think if we sat at the current state where we are now with no movement for 10 years, probably even you would sell your Pinto, if I had to guess. And so it's a matter of, where do you draw the line between, like, by not having prints, you're also increasing the length of the pod line.
Is there utility here or not? Is there a marginal buyer of Pinto that you or I can convince this is worth them buying? Like, from where I sit, that's the way that this thing can grow in a way that actually is sustainable. You need people that want Pinto. And you need people that want Pinto because of its properties as Pinto, which does include the fact that they get yield, but it's not yield that's guaranteed. This is where I think and this is a point I wanted to make earlier when Pinto Pirate was speaking, but then Frio jumped in and we didn't have an opportunity to make that point. It's like, to me, there's a very big difference between the protocol base layer and the economy that can be built on top of it. Like, the point was made that some people want a fixed yield. They want low volatility and they want a fixed yield. Like, in my mind, something like Spectra is exactly that, where people can actually get a fixed yield for a period of time and then just get the volatility of Pinto plus a fixed yield. Now, we have other problems, which is like PT and YT S Pinto is not really the most composable asset across DeFi. So there is a big composability question about how do you actually create the economic engine to use this thing and use it for real. But in my mind, like, there's two problems. One, we have yet to find a user of Pinto. So to your point, Ford, the main thing we have going for us right now is just prints. But I'm just very nervous. Like, we can print our way to 1 billion. Do Kwon printed his way to almost 100 billion, like on the order of 50 billion. And that set the whole development of this type of money back potentially a decade, because it was fake. It still didn't set off the bomb. There was no chain reaction because there was nothing there in the first place. So you want to print your way into a $1 billion system, like, that's just, I think that's going to blow up in people's faces and cause a lot more harm than, like, oh, this thing doesn't grow for 10 years, which in my mind, it's like, if in 10 years we can't figure out how to get the protocol to get the incentives well enough to just be at its value target and then figure out how people can use it, like, then it probably doesn't work, and that's okay too. It's okay if this doesn't work. I think it's better for us to find out that it doesn't work because we weren't able to get the thing to work than it is to just print the thing and get it so big until it blows up. And then we say, oh, it didn't work. It's like, well, it's definitely not going to work if that's the meta we're running. It's definitely not going to work. We're just going to print. And then, oh, we're in a debt cycle. We're just going to print again. And eventually it's going to blow up. So to me, it's very
to that, I would say, then let's just issue debt. Let's just issue more and more and more debt, like more debt. And then you think that's not going to make it blow up? Like, we're basically
this
walking
is
a
what Convert
tightrope.
is all about.
And the left side of the tightrope is, we're printing too much, and the right side is we're issuing too much debt, and we have to find like a happy medium between the two. Do you agree with that, like, general concept?
I think if you zoom out far, like from truly like 100,000 feet, I do agree that's a healthy mindset. But it's like the printing enough is really, from where I see it, it's like we need the economy that is using the currency to grow enough to facilitate growth of the currency enough to keep people interested in using this currency over other currencies. If that makes sense.
Absolutely, but wouldn't it be nice if the currency was closer to value target than like 50 cents?
Closer to value target, totally agree. In my mind, I think this is the thing I was saying, the implicit argument is being made that I said earlier. Like, yeah, this is making the argument that we are better off not having had this second downward depeg within this debt cycle, and would be better off having just started to print after that couple weeks below peg, and we never had this depeg to 50 cents. I am not in that camp. Like, I am of the camp that for a first debt cycle, depegging to 50 cents and eventually reaching its value target again is tremendous. I think this is great. I think the data that's being logged by the protocol is very strong. Like, you show me a currency that doesn't have 50% volatility within its first year, unless it's founded by a sovereign, So it's like, I think the protocol is performing pretty well. I think the people that are still in the protocol are likely to be really long-term holders. I think it's a very strong foundation. Personally, I'm very happy that the $1 million seller sold and got out before we grow to 100 million, because then they would have dumped not $1 million or so on us, but they would have dumped 5 million on us. And I think it's much better that they get flushed out now. But maybe there's just a difference of, agreement of what the best way to grow is. And I think it's valid to think, yeah, just growing is enough. But it's like, at what cost? At what cost? I'm much more interested in trying to figure out two problems. There's two things from where I see. One, how can we minimize as much as possible the duration and magnitude of deviations of price from its value target, the volatility specifically? Like, I think we can do a lot better. I think the convert bonus puts us in a much better position. I think there's pretty low hanging fruit to get the model to a place where it's like, okay, like, this is really strong, and hard to see any other way that we can, in the short term, without major code changes, improve the ability for the system to minimize its volatility. I say, great. Then separately, it's like, can we get someone to use this thing? And what would that look like? And until we've spent real effort trying to get people to use the thing, and I feel like the Spectra and Cream integrations were the beginning of that effort, but I don't think that it's been done to a level of completeness that it's like, okay, like, let's just print. Let's try again at 100 million market cap and see if people care more. Like, I just don't think we're there, candidly. I think there's a lot more work to do at 10 million before we've earned our way to go to 100 million.
I guess we'll just have to agree to disagree on this one, because I do think that, there was a period where we got back to peg and it was like, oh shoot, maybe it's going to work, maybe it's going to print again. And then it was just like, immediately the second we had like, 0.0001 over peg, people were down converting like instantly. And I think everyone who was watching the protocol then was like, that's it. There's no way that we're going to make it out of this hole until we have the like 5 or 6 million in pure Pinto, down converted so that they can't convert down on people anymore. And only if we blow past that are we going to, make it out of this hole that we're in. And because no one wants to dump 5 million Pinto into the system, then that's never going to happen. So let's just leave. That's my like interpretation of what happened. But with this change, it's like, oh shoot, now we're actually might have a small chance of getting like, 5% APY, 10% to actually make it attractive to bring in new people, even with people down converting when it goes over peg, and with the full ability for all the people harvesting pods to convert. Well, at least now we don't have like a $6 million, weight on our head. We have we still have the $6 million weight on our head, but there's a chance that I can come up for air, you know what I mean, to breathe a little bit, and in hopes of getting out of the well, basically.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's a matter of perspective. Like, would you rather that those people leave or stay?
I would rather they stay, because the more people we scare away with 50%, DPEGs, that's not a great impression. Who
But I
wants
think
to
about
mess
it differently.
around
Like,
with that?
we can't promise people a 3-week DPEG in the future. Like, I think it's quite reasonable for people to expect, 6-month, 12-month DPEGs in the future. And so it's like the people that in the first cycle, when there's the most upside for sticking around, this is the first round. This is the number one time where if you're like, hey, the risk return here is so good. If you still don't think it's worth sticking around, I would so much rather that you don't stick around. If it's like, if you're going to lose faith after 3 or 4 weeks, I think that's fine. Like, we don't hold it against you, but that's not the foundation of a new money. It's just not. Like, the foundation of a new money is people that are not going anywhere unless, this doesn't, we would have to see something really not work for years, not 3 weeks. 3 weeks is not a foundation. 3 weeks is we had a bad month, There's always going to be a bad month. The question is this thing going to be
I think some
able
amount of
to
DPEG is reasonable, but hanging out at 50, I mean, we weren't at 50 cents for very long. It was just like a day or two. But it's like you're not gonna be able to attract a lot of people, if it's like, well, oh, you want to sell because we got down to 95 cents or 90 cents, get out of here. We don't want you, this kind of attitude, I think, is not a very welcoming, community building attitude to have. And I feel like that's the attitude we have right now. I don't have this attitude, but I feel like some people have this attitude, oh, it's down and you want to leave, because you're down and you can't lose your savings, then get out of here, sell at a lower price, because we want you to leave at a lower price.
But that, to me, is not an illegitimate perspective. It's just that's not a constructive perspective. That's not a community building perspective. For me, it's more like I envision a positive narrative with language of hey, this is a tough time, but what the protocol is trying to do is to make sure that the people that stick around and collect stock, because it may be 6 more months before we grow significantly, if it's going to be 6 months before the protocol really grows again, that the people that collect the disproportionate amount of mints in 6 months are the people that actually believe in the thing. So now is the time for us to double down on our belief and hunker down. And for those that don't believe or can't afford to believe, we wish you well. But the way the system is designed is that the people that are going to leave, the people that are going to stay, we want to give the people that are going to leave the lowest price possible to leave, right? Because they're leaving. They're no longer participating in our economy. They're going somewhere else. They're taking their business elsewhere. So we say thank you, but there is only so much we can do. And it's this is where the protocol needs to have an explicit opinion about what is it trying to do, right? Terra and other previous attempts tried to maintain a hard peg. The promise that it made was, we're going to keep this thing at a hard peg at all times, at all costs. And that did create a binary, it's working and everyone gets, a dollar for dollar until it blows up and then no one gets any money. This is a much more nuanced system where it's well, if when it's healthy you leave, you should get a great price. If you leave when it's unhealthy, you should get a not great price. To me, that's totally different than we as a community should be on the same page about, hey, right now we just printed, the supply just grew 1,000x in a couple weeks. It's probably a little overgrown. We expect times are going to get a little tough. this is the mechanism that the system has in place to keep the true believers and to, the people that don't really believe or can't afford to stay, which is obviously unfortunate. Those people we do want to keep. This is the situation. This is how the protocol deals with it. But to me, like, the difference in what the protocol is doing and how we as a community can properly articulate ourselves about that, like, those are two totally different things from where I sit. And I want to be on the record, like, going to 50 cents once is fine in my book. Going to 50 cents next debt cycle when we're at 100 million will also be fine. I think it'll be much harder to recover from 50 cents if we're at 100 million. That's just facts. The amount that the protocol would have to borrow will be much higher. The efficacy of the convert system will have to be much higher. But my point is, low volatility does not mean no volatility. And as soon as we're in a world of, like, subjectively how much volatility is too much volatility, I think it's like, well, 50 cents, a 50% downward DPEG when the supply just grew, basically infinitely, feels very reasonable to me. But maybe others disagree. And then there's a question of, like, how long does it take? Sure. But I don't know. In my mind, I think the protocol is much better off having gone through this downward cycle, having gone through the second leg of the downward cycle, having flushed out that capital. I think the messaging, maybe there's a difference between, like, when we're talking from the perspective of the protocol, and the protocol is trying to be very, I don't know if cutthroat is the right word, but very, tight. The protocol is playing its hand tight so that all of the people that stick around can continue to use the protocol and benefit from the protocol. It has to be tight when it comes to the people that are no longer sticking around. There's a trade-off space in terms of, like, if it's too tight, it hurts the utility of the system, right? This is, if anything, the point that you're making. Like, protocol shouldn't be that tight. But in my mind, printing above peg, particularly printing extra above peg than what the market is demanding, is actually looser in the long term. It's more likely to lead to longer, greater downward DPEGs in the long term.
So I think this downward convert when over peg thing is more of a tragedy of the commons type of thing. It's like people that are doing this are assuming and hoping that the protocol is going to print long term. Otherwise, why would they down convert? They should just withdraw and sell and exit. But they think, like, oh, if I'm the first one who down converts, then I will, like, get more benefit, somehow from having LP, from being able to exit basically with less downside risk as opposed to holding pure Pinto. And this tragedy of the commons kind of means that everyone is trying to, like, jump on top of this down convert, which means that it's never, the only way to get out of this hole is to plow past all of the pure Pinto that's held in the silo, which basically means that now we're all, pulling ourselves down whenever we're trying to dig out of the hole. And so that's kind of the way that I view this.
But isn't this already what the
UPI.
convert penalty system we have in place already does?
Yeah, it does. It does. And I wish that we had the data to see how effective it is. But I just feel like it's not going to be effective enough, but I hope to be wrong.
But I guess for me, it's like, at least shouldn't we collect the data once and then probably reparameterize it at least once and run it back before we try to just, like I said, kind of fat finger it and just put in this mechanism that I think really does compromise our ability to collect data?
Yeah, I think that's valid.
So for me, it's like, I'm not saying we can't do this, but it's like there's so much cost to doing this now. I just feel like slow and
I
steady.
think my fear is that there could be a bigger cost if we don't get out of this hole. Like, Pinto's death spiral is, the amount of people willing to sow dries up, the temperature goes up, the debt goes up, the liquidity dries up, and that's it. That's the death spiral.
Oh, totally. And I would argue right now, like, we're in not a great place on any of those fronts, because, like, the temp is getting manipulated. Right now that we have Tractor, we don't actually have a great way to measure temperature and demand for soil and a way to change the temperature in line with demand. Like, or the way that we have it isn't synced up with the current system. So it's like, I just look at all of this and it's like, sure, the way that the system will blow up has not changed, but we're not in a great place to even evaluate how close we are to that at the moment, because things have just changed quite significantly with Tractor, and we haven't responded to it yet. So it's like, to me, this type of proposal is just way getting ahead of ourselves. Like, if in a year we're in the same spot, we've implemented convert bonus and nothing has changed, and we fixed the measurement of demand for soil, and the temperature in the field just keeps going up, and we just seem like we've tried everything we possibly can, or everything within reason, maybe is better to say it, and we're still fucked, and the protocol is not growing. At that point, sure, who wouldn't support? Let's just print and see what happens. Absolutely. But I just feel like we're not there yet, and I appreciate that you may feel like we are getting to that point where people are running out of gas and people are going to dump, and it's like, that would suck. But I feel like we should be more on the same page about, like, what are we trying to achieve in our data collection, and would we rather just grow, such that we sort of guarantee the project can continue at the expense of this opportunity for data? And then it's like, are we really going to leave this rule in just for this growth cycle? Are we going to leave it in perpetuity? It's scary to me if we're going to leave that rule in forever. So it's one thing if it's like, we just want to print to 100 million, we're going to do everything we can to do that. Fine. That's like I've said many times in this call, I think that's playing with fire. But at least let's be on the same page that it's like, it's time, and if we don't do this, the whole system's going to blow up. So we really need to try this. But to me, that's a last resort type of thing. That's where I sit.
Yeah, I think that's valid. I mean, yeah, it's hard to say, like, situations change fast. Even from a couple weeks ago to now, things are looking quite optimistic. The price has really come up a lot and the market has turned around. And, the Delta P is probably like minus 200 or something. And we were at a peak of like, minus, I don't know, 700 or 800. So that's pretty cool. Maybe the system's working.
In my mind, it is working. I think it could be working a lot better. I think with a convert bonus, I think the system could work much more effectively, particularly with Tractor. I think if in 6 months, and we have Tractor and a convert order book and a convert bonus, and we're in the same place, I think we should definitely reconsider printing as a solution to our problem. But I think we not only have to sort of complete the loop, complete this of the development on the model itself. Like, in my mind, there is very low-hanging fruit we can make to the model that we should do before we just print the thing. I think we also need to spend more time really trying to figure out where we could get this thing used today. And I would want to try to pursue that rigorously until we decide, all right, like, there's no utility right now. We're much more likely to find utility at 100 million, so we want to print our way to 100 million. But until then, I think it's hard to justify just turning the printer off, personally.
Yeah, I think that's valid. Although I do think it's easier to, get more integrations when you're at 100 million, a billion, whatever. But for sure, you need to get there with some kind of, stable, like, base.
This is the big question. It's like, what is a stable base? And if we thought that the model was just so good that it could just do whatever, we could just grow to 100 million and the model would still keep working, then I would say the model should already be at 100 million. The model should be that strong that it just naturally did that. So the fact that it didn't do that is, in and of itself, it's a problem. So I think we should consider ourselves lucky that we have a chance to fix these problems, fix these inefficiencies at a $10 million cap as opposed to a $100 million cap. Like, we're 200K below peg, as if we're not going to be able to rally up a couple 100K and repeg the system as a community and eventually go through another growth cycle. Like, in my mind, we're in a great spot. if you 10x this, and now we're talking about, instead of being 700K, 800K below peg, now you're 7 or 8 million below peg, like Beanstalk is, independent of price. It's really hard to find, where am I going to get $8 million from if the fucking thing doesn't even work, Like, good luck is how I see it. So, in my mind, I appreciate the impatience very much, but the only way that we're actually going to sustain this thing is it has to work. And it's either going to work just from the incentives being so good on its own, and or we have utility. Those are the two ways this thing works. So I just think we're not at the point where we can, in a way that I would feel is ethical, like just start printing.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think your framing of the PI as just start printing is very misleading, because it's more of like a slap on the wrist when down converting, and there's no, it's not like we're clicking a button to make the printing start. But I understand your point.
I would feel much better if we had the latter. If we had a print button and we said, you know what, we're just going to print. That, to me, would feel much more authentic than this proposal. This proposal is, we want to print, but we're not going to tell you we want to print.
I'm happy to say that we want to print when there's demand and it's over peg, and this reduces the tragedy of the commons problem when converting down. But
there's no demand. That's right now we're going to repeg from converts is my expectation. So it's like no money coming in or out. We're still repegging. The market's up a little bit, but there's converts happen. So we repeg not because of new demand, certainly not because of any new demand above peg, but because of converts. Like, now we have some market volatility and the price goes above its value target, but there's still no demand. Why would we print?
Like, actually, I would argue that convert ups are demand. Like, every time you convert up, you're buying Pinto. Like, for some reason, when you convert, if you make that decision, you are deciding that you'd rather hold pure Pinto, either for the extra stock exposure, the extra seeds.
Yeah, but people have decided that they don't want to, unless the system is paying them to do that. Is already the state of the game. So it's like the crop ratio is super high, and now we're talking about implementing a bonus. Both of these things are not like, are evidence that people don't want to just convert. So it's like the system is already incentivizing people to convert in order to minimize the volatility. Like, that's great. That's great. But that's not demand. That's artificial. That's the protocol using the value that it has to maintain its value target closer. And it got someone within the system to move to facilitate that. But there's no new demand in that case. None whatsoever.
I mean, there's no external demand, but there's demand within the people already holding it. I mean, whoever is converting is expressing a preference to hold Pinto over the non-Pinto assets. So
given that they'll earn more seeds, or given that they get a stock bonus. So it's like, sure, they're expressing that preference, but it's a preference that's conditional. We've already tried.
Sure, but the whole system is conditional. The whole system is a series of incentives to try and encourage people to hold Pinto.
We're talking about something very particular, which is you're making the contention that converting upwards is demand for Pinto. Because it's like, well, before I had an LP token, that's part Pinto, part something else. And my exposure is to both of those assets. Whereas once I convert, now my exposure is entirely to Pinto. So my Pinto exposure just went up. So in theory now, there is more demand for Pinto. And I'm saying that's totally true. That's totally true. But that's like, if it's from a convert, that's within the closed system. Like, there's no new demand coming into the system. We're still a closed loop. And within this closed loop, someone has decided to, basically they're like, fine, you're paying me enough to go from LP, which I prefer, to Pinto, which I prefer conditionally under me getting all these rewards. But that's totally different than new demand for Pinto.
Absolutely agreed. And I absolutely agree that it would be way better to have fresh demand than, the system just converting within existing capital. But at the same time, it's really cool that the system can use its own incentives and just saying like, hey, I'll give you a little bit more of future mints. And if that's enough to return the system to peg, like that's pretty cool by itself.
I couldn't agree more. That is what I'm advocating for. I'm specifically advocating for exactly that, and to do that without the incentive that, hey, as soon as we repeg, you're going to get some prints. Like, that's a bad promise, because if we assume no new inflows from outside the system to inside the system, and now the system not only incentivizes converts back to the value target, which is great. We're both in agreement that it's great. But now, not only does it do that to prove its utility, now it also creates the incentive such that at the margin, people don't convert, so the system starts to print, even though no new money has come into the system whatsoever. To me, that's a totally different thing. To me, that's very dangerous, because now you're actually giving every participant a greater ability to take value out of the system when no new value has come into the system.
I mean, I think that incentive already exists. Like earlier when we were dropping to like 98, 97 cents and it was like a minor, missing of target, I converted up because I wanted it to get back to peg and that to make it so that if anybody came in with new money, then the system could potentially start a growth cycle. Like that's what my incentive was to do. And that's what I did.
And therefore,
if you think that is like not like, do you think that was a good incentive for the system or not good? Like the system should not have encouraged me to convert up, at 97, 98 cents.
This is where it's like, I think we need to have a more rigorous discussion about what the system wants. And that, to me, is like step one. Given a set of circumstances, what does the system want to happen? Step two, how can the system create the incentives to, in the most efficient way, facilitate what it wants to happen? I mean, we've already gone like 90 very strong minutes here, and this is very fun, personally, honestly. It's a lot of fun to be doing this again. I think the discussion has to be held a little bit more in a rigorous fashion than like, what do I want in this particular circumstance? Like, I think we should try to codify what are the principles, what is the actual monetary policy of the system. So in my mind, it's like the white paper is a document that just says what the monetary policy of the system is, but there's no meta document that explains what the intention of the monetary policy is. Like, why is the monetary policy what it is? And I feel like, we're trying to have a discussion about changing the monetary policy, but we're actually in disagreement about what the intention of the monetary policy should be. So I personally, I'm interested, and I think it would be quite a work to actually try to define the intention of the policy. But I think that's a necessary step for us to take this discussion further in a rigorous way. I don't expect that to be something we can do in like a single call. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Maybe we can pick this up like on a future town hall. I know we've kind of moved beyond, the title of this call is like Pinto University 101, and we're kind of getting deep in the weeds of this particular PI. But it's a great thing because it's it kind of asks questions that are much deeper about the protocol. And, just in two sentences, I think that the protocol wants to grow, because if it doesn't grow, then the cost for removing a Pinto from the system is always way higher, simply because interest, is always going to be above 1%. And so therefore, the system over the long period of time must grow. So I think that the monetary policy should be that of encouraging growth very carefully to at least some slight degree, so that the system does not die over a long period of time. But yeah, happy to pick this up in a future call.
I agree with you that should generally be the monetary policy, the intention of the monetary policy. Like, I want a monetary policy that is incentivizing growth in my economy. That's why I would choose this particular money. Like, this is a monetary policy that works for me. It makes the conditions for growth in my economy, the one that I participate in, most likely, right? So I'm not taking the opinion that the monetary policy shouldn't be opinionated about growing the economy. Not at all. I just want us to be on the same page about what is the growth, right? Is it just demand for the money? Or is it there's something being created where there's naturally increasing demand for the money, which I think is maybe the main question here. So I propose that we wrap this up now. Looking forward to continuing these debates. Appreciate Pinto Pirate and Ford Pinto for advocating for this policy or proposal. I think this type of culture of debate and just open discussion is necessary. So thank you guys very much. And I don't know, Ed?
I just said, yes, thank you. Yeah, I very much appreciate it. And, I think we both love Pinto and the whole system a lot. So this is very, very interesting for me.
Yeah, I would happily engage in these conversations, on a regular basis. I think we're missing, we had class with Beanstalk where there was an opportunity to go really deep into all of this stuff regularly. And I think, we tried with the town hall and a couple other things. It still hasn't really fallen into place where we have a forum where this is happening on a regular basis. But I think we should try to make it a part of the culture here, where we are having like really deep policy debates on a regular basis. Because from where I sit, the policy is far from figured out.
Yeah, agreed.
All right, thank you, everyone. This is very exciting.
Thank you. Peace.
Thanks, everybody. Peace, guys.